Hi there, I'm Philip Heidson, the founder of Art of Procurement. And at Art of Procurement, we help procurement professionals like you plan and deliver change with confidence. Whether it's through the mapping and prioritization of your change journey, securing the subject matter expertise that you need to help you along the way, or assisting you and your team to take action on what they learn, and what's really important is on also what they already know. And of course, a big part of what we do is this weekly podcast where we share strategies and tactics that aim to inspire and help elevate your change journey. I want to thank you for joining me today. Let's go straight into the show. Hi there, and welcome to episode 242 of The Art of Procurement. And I'm joined today by Louis Bastone. Louis is a long-time listener, I'm proud to say. He's also an Indirect Category Manager for ASML. ASML are a manufacturer of chip-making machines in the semiconductor industry. We often discuss the impact that procurement talent has on results and the role it plays in determining how our function evolves. The procurement community, we're vibrant, we're diverse, but we need to remember that some of our best future team members are currently either in college, perhaps they're working in other functions. And so how we represent ourselves to them will help determine how soon and how willingly they'll join our ranks. Today's conversation is for all those who are interested in learning more about what a career in procurement looks like, or for leaders who are looking to bring emerging talent into their team. In the interview, Louis shares what it looks like on a day-to-day basis to work in the procurement field, and he also provides some interesting insights into the entrepreneurial appeal of working in procurement and how newcomers can balance an affinity for their adopted function while not losing the critical edge of a broad cross-functional point of view. And so I started the conversation, as I often do, by asking Louis if he found procurement or did procurement find him?
Well, it's kind of a hybrid answer. In college, I was a double major in marketing and entrepreneurship at SUNY Plattsburgh. Mm-hmm. And in my senior year, I took an international business class, and it had a unit in supply chain management. Now, being a senior, I've never heard of supply chain management, but I found the topic to be very interesting. And it seemed like it was really dynamic, and I went and I researched the topic on my own quite a lot. And as you know, supply chain management comprises of, many things such as logistics, operations, planning, and purchasing, procurement.
Yeah.
And once I found that, I really kind of fell in love with it and realized that the job placement rate was good. So I decided to stay an extra year at my college to pick up a third major in supply chain management. So that's really where I found procurement initially, and that the ironic thing about it is once I started majoring in supply chain management, I always said that the least likely career path that I'd be taking is in purchasing, but now I find myself in a procurement role, yeah. And I really love it and I enjoy it, and it has allowed for a great career so far for a young professional like myself. So usually procurement ends up finding people, but I kind of am a little bit different because luckily I was able to find the major in college.
Yeah, one of the few that actually studied procurement before coming into procurement. It's interesting for me as somebody like an awful lot of people, like most of the people we talk to on the show, who stumbled into the profession in one way, shape, or form. This may be a really open-ended question, but what does a procurement program in college actually, or a part of a supply chain program that includes procurement, what does that look like? What are some of the kind of teachings in procurement to prepare you for a career in the profession?
Well, I'm really glad that you asked that because, I actually just finished up my master's degree in integrated supply chain management, and what I can say is the procurement part of the curriculum is not extensive enough, mm-hmm. and it's usually pretty minimal compared to the logistics and planning and operations aspects of that major. So, unfortunately, I haven't found too many schools that have a procurement-specific major, but I believe that that's something that would make a lot of sense in the future, and I really hope to see more extensive programs. So you usually get, maybe 2 classes from a whole entire supply chain management curriculum that is really purchasing or procurement specific. I really think that they could expand very heavily within universities in that specific profession. I do believe that procurement could be a major within itself, actually separate from supply chain management.
Yeah, it's really interesting that remains the case across most colleges. Given what the profession is, and as you compare it versus sales, versus marketing, versus some of the other supply chain functions, it is a shame that we're in that position, but it also provides a great opportunity for us to do what we can to advocate and to just help share the word on what an interesting career a procurement career can be.
Absolutely. And it's something that I focus very heavily on doing. I still speak to, some people that are in college that'll ask me for advice on this profession. And I just say, there's a lot of enthusiasm that should be had within this profession that isn't, because I think it's a very misunderstood profession, because not enough people are talking about it and how dynamic it is and how much of a difference you can make in the profession. And unless you really understand it, you think it's more of a tactical or operational profession or administrative, and that's not the case at all. So I think the enthusiasm being there within procurement is something that really needs to be honed upon by everybody who's in the profession.
Yeah, I feel like you only truly kind of fall in love with the profession and the opportunities for a really interesting, diverse career within procurement once you actually start to do it. So, I had no idea what procurement was when I started, and I was just placed in a procurement role. And, supposedly going and doing marketing and then HR, these rotations that I thought were sounded a lot more interesting. I was really disappointed when I didn't get the marketing rotation first. This was in Ford Motor Company, who I went onto their graduate program after I graduated. And yet I went into procurement having no idea what it was. And I did my stint and, I wanted to stay, and I never... while I've done lots of roles within procurement, within operations, it's always been around the same area. After working in it, kind of my eyes were open to the opportunity, and I never felt like I missed on something else by working in procurement, because we can put to use so many different broader business and commercial skills that you don't necessarily get to use when you're in another function like a marketing or a HR or even a finance.
Exactly, and it's something that I always tell everybody that asks me. It's such a dynamic profession. When you are in procurement, you really shouldn't only study procurement. You should study marketing. You should understand finance. You should understand business law, and it's really one of the only professions that marry so many of those things together, and also allows you to be creative. So I think a big reason why marketing and entrepreneurship, those sort of practices are so glorified is because you can be creative on a really high level. And I think that attracts a lot of young people. But they don't really realize it. In procurement, there's a lot of room for creativity. Yeah. And you get a problem and you can solve it in so many different creative aspects, utilizing some of the principles that you would use within marketing. Or within a lot of other different business practices. So it's a really interesting profession that, like I said, it just doesn't get the glory that I think it deserves, at least at this point, especially to young college students and young professionals alike.
Yeah, I think when you think about some of those more creative, or when you think of them as more creative professions like marketing and entrepreneurship, and my background as well was I did business and marketing in college. I've come to use my marketing so much because a lot of what procurement is really trying to influence and sell your vision for the future, and to make your vision for the future happen, put it into practice. It's like I say, influence, it's persuasion, and it's not necessarily just going through a process. And having that background, I think, is a real benefit in a career like this, where, to be honest, there's a lot of opportunity for somebody who has that background, because it's still, I would say, we're still not as creative as we could be. And obviously that leads to the opportunity, if you do have that, to stand out a little bit.
Absolutely. And, I take a lot of the marketing principles that I know of. I'm a big Seth Godin fan. Yep. I read a lot of Seth Godin. And, one of his biggest marketing principles, for example, tribes, is, I believe that if you use that principle of, influencing tribes, of, trying to get the buy-in from the few top influencers, internal stakeholder wise, it's really the most effective way to actually get your idea out there, rather than trying to influence everybody internally all at once. So it's just little marketing principles like that really make a big difference in this profession. And it's pretty interesting how you could interconnect the two.
Yeah, it was interesting when you posted about picking up the latest book by Seth Godin, because Seth is somebody that I follow as well. And I was interested to see, like, how do you position that from a procurement perspective? Because it's atypical, I would say. And yet so much of what we do is based on storytelling. And by storytelling, I don't mean telling stories in the fictional sense, but in kind of using the information that we have access to and our views on marketplaces and telling a story of what the possibilities are to really corral people around that vision, so that you can then get advocates and help them to start executing and delivering on the vision and the strategies that you have.
Of course. And I mean, on top of, say the marketing principles, there's a lot of, foundational sales principles that I use as well. I was a salesperson, for Verizon Wireless at one time. And a lot of the time you have to frame things within, somebody's language, right? So if you're speaking to somebody from a legal department or someone from a finance department or an internal stakeholder who's either, an HR or marketing or, an engineer, they all kind of speak different languages. So you have to understand, you have to have the emotional IQ to really get that you need to be speaking their language, because until you speak their language, they're not going to be so apt to listen to you, and to look at you as a strategic partner rather than a roadblock, which is a very thin line in our profession with, right? So, internally, anybody who's in our profession knows you're a lot of the time strategic partner, roadblock, and that's kind of, it's one or the other, in that internal stakeholder's eyes.
Yes. And, talking about the language of the business rather than procurement, that is so important. It's really, the longer you spend in the profession, the harder it is to train yourself out of, because you don't realize what's the jargon and what's the procurement words, because it's just language that you use. So for anybody who's coming into the profession, you will start to hear a lot of different terms and terminology and acronyms and all that good stuff being used. While yes, it's important to understand what those are, because you kind of need that to talk internally. Please don't take those externally as much as you can, because we all do, and that's where stakeholders really start to question whether they want to work with you, because they think that you're in it for you, not you're in it for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe that there just has to be a level of empathy, right? I think that to be great in this profession, you have to be empathetic, and you're constantly putting yourself in other individuals' shoes, whether that's the supplier, whether that's an internal stakeholder, whether that's coming from, finance when you're working on an agreement, whether you're working on a contract and you're talking to legal, you constantly have to have an empathy and put yourself in other shoes to understand, where are they coming from? And if I know that before we have this conversation, it's probably going to be a lot more productive.
Yeah. So I want to, for anybody listening who's, thinking a little bit more about what procurement is, I want to make it a little bit more, so they can touch it and feel it, get a real sense for what you do every day. So I'd love for you to share, what does a typical day for you look like?
Well, that's a very good question, and I have been asked this before, and what I tell people is I don't believe that there's such thing as a typical day in this profession. Procurement is very much like a game of chess, where really, no two games are the same, no 2 days are the same. It's a very dynamic profession. There's always a lot going on. There's always, generally speaking, I put it into 2 clusters. There's long-term projects, such as, high dollar RFPs that you're doing, strategic sourcing efforts to bring on new suppliers that could benefit the organization, initiatives to streamline the overall process of procurement internally. And then there's short-term tasks like negotiating contracts and renewing contracts and, working on business terms with existing suppliers.
Yeah.
I use a project management software called Asana, and Asana is a really great software that helps me understand and manage all of my projects and where I am in the pipeline of all of them to assure that I'm utilizing my time the best. Time management is definitely important because, today I may want to do something and I may have a plan, but when I get into the office or when I wake up and I look at my emails right away, I may see, well, here's 2 contracts and, we needed them done yesterday. So, what can you do? And, what's the turnaround time going to look like? And obviously, it's always a quality thing, right? You want to make sure that everything's being negotiated the best they can. So when that sort of thing comes on your desk, it throws you for a loop, but you kind of get used to that constant dynamic change day to day. And it's one of the reasons why I love the profession. I'm never bored.
Right.
It's very safe to say I'm never bored, and there's always a lot going on. So if you're somebody who's an individual who always likes to feel like you're working on things that are valuable to the organization every day and it's never the same, it's really a good profession to look into, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I want to build on that a little bit. I have another question that I'm going to come back to later that just jumps on something you said. But you talked about you're always involved in things that are meaningful and important to the organization. There's times when stakeholders, maybe they fear us because they see us as, a team who is going to come and stop them being able to buy what they want and stop them being able to spend the money that they want to spend. How do you approach that, in trying to build trust with your stakeholders?
So something that I do a lot of the time, and I mentioned it before, is I happen, I'm lucky enough to be a very empathetic individual in general. So I always speak to my stakeholders in terms of them, not in terms of myself. Okay. My stakeholders don't know my KPIs because there's really no reason for them to know my KPIs, because unless they're aligned with theirs, it's really not too valuable. I always want to understand, what are the bottlenecks that you're facing? And many of the times, stakeholders will say nothing, right? Because they don't want change a lot of the time. So they'll say, oh, nothing's wrong. But the more you have a conversation with them and you just talk about, well, what's going on with this, and they'll eventually open up and you start to hear trends of potential bottlenecks and issues. And you start to just either make suggestions or proactively go and figure out, well, how could it be better? So it's not the mindset of it, if it's not broken, don't fix it. It's, if it could be better, it might as well be broken. Right. So I always talk to my stakeholders in terms of them. So if they ask me a question, I would say, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't want to put that stress on myself of looking for a new supplier if this supplier is doing what they're supposed to be doing in this regard. And they understand that I got their best interest because of how that answer is framed. So it's always framing things from their perspective and being in their shoes.
Yeah, that's super important. We're just going through a process here at Procurement to do exactly the same. And we often forget. So the way that we're thinking about it, and I think you can apply it, is really what you were talking about, is the fact that we're not necessarily the hero, we're the guide. We help people, we help them think of new ways of solving challenges or problems that they have. We're not the person to come in here and fix it all, or to try and claim that we fix it all and that we know it all. We're the person to come and help them be more effective at bringing and delivering the outcomes that they want to achieve.
I agree with that. And even if you have the know-how, right? Like even if you have all the know-how in the category and you understand all the externalities, unless you have that buy-in and you're talking to the stakeholder from their perspective, they're not going to listen to that expertise that you have. Right. So your influence is still very low. So the knowledge and the influence are not always in correlation with one another if you're not doing things the right way. And it's a lot of moving parts to think about, but it's really what we have to deal with day to day in our profession.
Now, the other thing I wanted to come back to, because it was interesting to me when you talked about the use of Asana, and not necessarily that you use a particular software tool, but it just triggered my kind of thought as you're talking about your experience in entrepreneurship too, and taking the entrepreneurship program in college, is that you're really looking at your category, so that all the different suppliers and all the different spend that fall under the areas that you're responsible for, you're looking at it as managing your own business, essentially. So you're managing a business within a business.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's how I look at it every single day. And it even goes back to, when I was a server, I had tables. Yeah. And I looked at those tables as my business. Mm-hmm. So I think that you can really apply that to a lot of different jobs. But when it comes to procurement, your categories are your categories and you own them. And that is your business.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that those are as efficient and as good as they can possibly be. And as I said, if they could be better, they might as well be broken. So you really got to look externally, internally, do all your research and get the know-how to really be able to make that positive impact that you want to make to your internal stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd love to get your perspective on, coming into the procurement world, we've talked about what an interesting kind of opportunity it provides and a really diverse kind of opportunities and things to work on. But obviously, everything's not roses all the time. So what are some of the challenges that you encountered? And maybe there's some ones that you weren't expecting. I'd love to hear what those are and how you kind of went about overcoming them or mitigating them.
So a lot of the times the challenges around procurement, what I have found is around the individuals that you're working with, because you're always working with such a diverse group of individuals. Mm-hmm. So if your stakeholders are engineers, but you're also working with finance people on agreements, and you're working with legal on agreements, and you're working with the external supplier, it's really aligning everything. So a lot of the time, the challenges come with alignment in our profession, because aligning what everybody wants and the needs of everybody, and, dealing with, for example, finances, KPIs are going to fall into some of the potential agreement with suppliers, so they have a buy-in. So I think that the challenges always come with alignment. And I think, again, the way to solve them is to understand, well, where are we? You have to really look at the situation from a million miles up, like you would if you were the owner of a Fortune 500 company. Yeah. But then you also have to have your feet on the ground to understand what is everybody thinking and what is the best way to solve these problems. And a lot of the time, what I understand, the way that I solve them is I make sure that through every step of the process within a project, I am including all of the parties involved. Mm-hmm. I'm being transparent, and together we're all figuring out what makes the most sense and getting agreement from everyone. So I'd say, generally speaking, the bottleneck comes with alignment, and the solution is just making sure that you're being transparent, you're understanding everything from that high level, but you're keeping your feet on the ground. And like I said, it's not always easy, and actually it's always a challenge. Yeah. But it's part of what makes procurement fun.
Yeah, to me, there's so many different personalities involved that our profession is going much more in the direction of softer skills, like the impact of soft and relationship-based skills, and away from the more technical skills that are our heritage. Because it's a people business, and we can have all the knowledge and all the data and we may know exactly the best ways to negotiate, but if you can't actually build relationships with people to help execute, it doesn't matter what you know.
Absolutely, and I think that the technology is also taking care of a lot of the technical skills, and I think that that's going to be a growing trend. The technology, it enables you to be able to find data so fast, to be able to understand everything that's going on really quickly. So because of that, those people skills aren't going to go away. But a lot of the technical skills can be replaced with technology. Right. software and things of that nature.
There's a lot of people within the procurement community that are willing to help and to help people who are earlier on their journey. In fact, the art of procurement has been built on people willing to give up their time to share their experiences with others. I wonder how you approached, building relationships and getting insights from those that are more experienced, that are more senior in the profession, and not having to feel like you're on an island, that you're in this on your own, that you're on your own and you got to figure it all out yourself.
Yeah, getting involved in networking is obviously important in any profession for, individuals like myself who are still in our 20s, and really wanting to hone in on a specific career. Talking to the thought leaders of those professions are really significant. Mm-hmm. So, me personally, I'm part of ISM, the New York City chapter. I'm part of APIC. I'm part of SIG Sourcing Industry Group. I also got a certification through them. So being part of groups like that, it almost goes viral. So you join groups that are procurement specific, and then you start meeting individuals who are thought leaders. And I always say there's kind of a Northeast crew of procurement thought leaders that I can, name. And those individuals almost know everybody else. So this whole relationship building that we're talking about in regards to stakeholders and other internal functions and suppliers, it also applies to the external of networking within the profession, understanding what are people doing to change the game right now. And that's the stuff that you can get excited about, because when you get into this room with a bunch of people who are, almost, procurement nerds, right? Mm-hmm. And you could go and you could talk about what's going on, who's doing what, what's coming, what's to come. It gets really exciting, and you start actually getting that enthusiasm for the profession rather than day to day going to your job and just being part of the department. So to me, it's joining those organizations, seeking out help. I mean, any procurement professional that I've reached out to, really has been great with, answering questions that I have and really, paying it forward, right? And they always say, we want you to do that one day. And that sort of stuff is very encouraging to me, within the profession. So it's not always easy to get out and do that networking, but if you want to understand the profession well and move up the rungs of the ladder as quickly and ambitiously as you want to, I think it's a necessary step.
Yeah, it's not always easy. It's always easier said than done, isn't it? But once you take the first step, everybody pretty much that I've spoken to we all feel like we're all part of a single community, and we're all trying to do what we can to move the profession forward. And by doing so, creates opportunities for everybody that's in the profession. So I would definitely encourage you, just, don't be afraid to ask questions, to approach people, go to events as much as you can. There's more events now than ever before, I think, in the procurement space. And just kind of start there, because I think that if people see that you have an interest and you're wanting to learn, develop, and grow, that they want to help you do whatever you can to do that.
Yep, and I definitely agree with that. And I think there's a lot of great resources for it. I mean, I have some people reach out to me on LinkedIn and things of that nature. And anytime they do, it's flattering, and you want to help them, and you want to move the profession forward, and you want to be enthusiastic about it. And like I said, you want to let that creativity flow. We're all individuals, and this isn't just this isn't a place where you go sit at a desk for 8 hours and you don't make any sort of an impact. I believe that in our profession, we make some of the biggest impact you could possibly make in any profession. So it's very exciting when you see individuals that are younger, that are hungry, that want to also do what you are doing.
Now, you just mentioned LinkedIn there. So I want to ask how you approach using social media to both kind of explore and mature your own views, but also just to connect and engage with other people in the profession.
Absolutely. So ironically, I don't use things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I don't use those things at all, actually. But I do use LinkedIn quite a bit. And I think that LinkedIn is a real force to be reckoned with in regards to our profession. We have some really great strategic sourcing and procurement groups in LinkedIn. You have a lot of CPOs that you can just message and reach out to. A lot of the time, you will see a message back. My feed is always filled with, folks saying, schedule an hour with me and let's just talk about procurement.
Yeah.
And these are high level people that just, like I said, they want to pay it forward and they want to help. And they're interested to talk to other like-minded individuals that are doing the same thing, but in a different organization, maybe with a different structure, and just seeing, let's be a little creative and let's talk to each other. Let's brainstorm and let's see, what's working and what's not.
Right.
And I think LinkedIn is a really good place for that. And I see it a lot.
So I just want to ask a little bit about kind of career planning. And I think it's easy when we come into any role, we always can see things that maybe we want to do that are a little bit more strategic, but we have to kind of learn some of the fundamentals at the beginning before we start doing that climb. I always struggled with the idea that it shouldn't matter what my age was. It's all about my experience, the impact that I have. And a lot of organizations don't necessarily think that, they don't come to that to say they want you to have some of that grounding before they start promoting you. I just wonder how you approach that. Kind of what's your thinking about what the steps that you're trying to take, the experiences that you're trying to get as you think about what the ultimate goal is for your career in procurement?
Well, it's a great question, and going back to what you just said about it's not always about the actual years of experience that you have. It's about how much you're really learning and doing each day. A lot of the time, I say if somebody says they have 20 years of experience, do you have 21? Do you have 20 years of a year of experience, or do you have 20 actual years of experience? And those are two very fundamentally different things. So, every day understanding where you want to be within your career is very important because you're always going to want to be working toward that. So, for example, I started at, a bit more tactical operational roles, a strategic sourcing specialist. A lot of the time I was doing the data mining. I was understanding what the spend looked like, and I was leaving it to others to do the more strategic and execution work. Now I'm at a point where, I'm a category manager. So being a category manager, you kind of do that first step, but then you do the execution and the strategic as well. So, then of course, after that, my goal will be to ultimately lead a procurement organization. And that's pretty standard, I would think, going from a tactical operational, just so you can understand, get your feet wet and understand what's going on. And it's very likely that at some point that's going to almost go away and get cut off due to technology. But right now, that's where we are. Yeah. Going into the strategic, understanding, well, how do you execute? How do you take that information now? How do you execute it to actually start making that difference and being the person who's doing it? And then how do you lead others to now do what you were doing? So ultimately, when it comes to career planning, that's where I see myself going. And I think a lot of people in procurement likely would want to go and would be a pretty standard path for a lot of individuals.
How do you think about kind of diversity of experience? So, and this doesn't necessarily, it can mean different roles, and going and taking kind of a different perspective of going outside of procurement or going into a role that isn't necessarily involved in the buying side, let's see, but more the infrastructure side of procurement. But getting that diversity of experience, either exploring it within your current role or looking at a different role, so that you have kind of multiple different facets of experience that you can bring together as opposed to just being on kind of a single ladder.
So I think it makes sense, but what I've seen a lot of the time is I've seen a lot of folks move from finance to procurement, from operations to procurement, and they usually have one mindset, and it's usually half of procurement, right? So if you come from an operational standpoint, you usually understand the process side. If you come from finance, you usually understand just really the financial side.
Yeah.
And procurement gives you the experience of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is if you want to be in procurement because you will get the know-how of everything else.
Yeah.
And it's just nature that that's going to happen anyway.
So
that's my thought process on that is if you want to be in procurement, be in procurement because it marries a lot of things together and you will get a feel for all of them.
Yeah, you talked a little bit earlier, and I think this is super critical because you can be in procurement and have a very procurement mindset, or you can be in procurement and have a very outward kind of customer facing mindset. So as long as you have that mindset where it is all about the alignment, it is about empathy with your stakeholders, it is about thinking of yourself as a service business versus looking at yourself as a technical procurement specialist who can drive good results by driving a process, but that takes that kind of doesn't look as outward as you would if you're exhibiting some of those other behaviors. If you keep that mindset, I think that's okay, because that's really what's important. You can bring those, sometimes you can bring those from the outside because other professions perhaps do a better job of instilling that at scale across their people. And if you're staying in procurement, then just really have a heavy focus on those kind of things that you talked about earlier, because that's what it's all about, is it's about working directly with people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it really is the best of both worlds, being in procurement, but also having that outward focus.
Yeah.
So that is definitely what I suggest more of.
And so, Louis, as I wrap up, I just have one final question. That is, as you have, gone through your career to date, and you look back and think, what are the ways that you've been able to stand out from the crowd? I'd just love if you could share some of that insight with listeners who are interested in pursuing a career or furthering their career in procurement.
It's a great question. And, the answer, I believe, is in versatility. Mm-hmm. You have to stay really versatile. You have to really kind of be a Swiss Army knife. You can't just focus on reading procurement books. You can't just focus on only speaking with procurement people. You're going to want to be diversified, and you're going to want to be really versatile. Yeah. And you're going to want to know about, some marketing tactics, maybe some sales tactics, some finance. You're going to want to maybe study a little bit of business law, at least what goes into contracts, things like, force majeure and indemnification and things of that nature, the standard things that you're going to see in agreements. So I believe that being versatile and always really having that willingness to learn outside of my comfort zone has helped me extraordinarily. Yeah. On top of the networking and always wanting to just know more. And I think another big one, and it's a bit cliche, but I believe it's true, is the positivity and enthusiasm about the profession. Yeah. Because when you come into this world, you see there are some people that are that way, but much of the time you will find a lot of people that tend to be a little bit more old school, and they don't have that enthusiasm. They don't have that excitement. They don't realize the change that could really be made. And that enthusiasm, that positivity really can be contagious. And I think it's something that is an intangible that's very important.
Yeah. Well, Louis, I really thank you for the insights. I think it's a great kind of primer for a career in procurement. It's a profession that's often, you said at the start, it's often misunderstood. There's so much opportunity in here, but it requires that mindset of growth and of bringing in, kind of being a collaborative partner, figuring out how you can use all the tools and all the access to supply markets that you have at your disposal to really make a difference for your company and to really do some interesting things that focus, both on the cost management side, but also the opportunity of driving revenue and increasing customer satisfaction. There's so much more that we have the potential to do in a career in procurement. So I want to thank you again for sharing your experiences, your insights, and some of your perspectives. And I'd just love to ask, just to wrap up, if any listener would like to connect, get to know you, ask you some questions, where's the best place for them to find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Louis Bastone. Generally, I'm the first person that pops up. And you can also shoot me a personal email, at lbastone, the number 6 at gmail.com. And I'd be happy to speak to, anybody about the profession.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Louis. What I'll do, I'll include those in our show notes today. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/Louis. And that's Louis spelt Louis. That's artofprocurement.com/Louis. And I'll put your LinkedIn profile and your email address there for folks to contact with you directly.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Phil. I appreciate it.
Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.